So you guys are here today to chat with us about leadership. Here at Malavita, we're a coaching company. We specialize in leadership, life, health, career coaching. So we believe, and we're here to teach you about some of our leadership technologies and methodologies to help you guys be better leaders each and every day with your teams. That's why Coach Jen is here. So I am going to shut up now. You will find me in the chat if you guys have any questions or thoughts. I'm going to let Coach Jen take it from here. And yes, I hope you guys enjoy.
Thank you, Randall, and I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Just one additional logistical thing. My internet's been a little spotty, thank you to this world that we're in with Zoom right now. So if something crazy happens, just bear with us. Randall might take over screen sharing or something, but we'll make it work. So no worries. It's just sort of our world and our life these days. So hello, if you haven't had the chance to meet me, my name is Jennifer Maynard. I go by Jen or Jennifer, and I am one of the leadership coaches here at Malavita. I did a webinar about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So some of you may be repeaters, and that was my first one in a very long time. So if you didn't get a chance to get that content, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'll make sure you get a copy of that last one as well. But what we're going to be doing today, we'll get into the agenda and all that soon. I just wanted to take a brief moment to say hello, let you know that I am one of the team of leadership coaches that we do have. I work a lot with some of the folks in higher education, some of the folks in corporate, and then some of the folks who are just working on development and elevating themselves on their own. I'm what I call a strengths-based coach, sort of identified myself as this. So what I really like to do with people is identify their strengths and help to utilize those to elevate and grow them to the next level. It's a great theme in conjunction to leadership and leadership coaching overall, because realistically as leaders, that's really what we should be doing even for our people, right? Is helping them identify their strengths and utilizing them to grow even more. Not as much of a focus on the blind spots and the weaknesses. Those are important things, but we're going to use those strengths to overcome some of those areas. So that's how I work through the coaching process. And because of Malavita, we have all these great e-coaching tools. So we will use those suite of tools together. So you get the opportunity to work one-on-one, but then in kind of that individual reflective e-coaching state as well. So in conjunction with all of those things is kind of making up what our programs are, and some of that we'll talk about a little bit later as we go on. But that's me. And let's get into the fun stuff, the content, because you don't really care to see my picture that much. So today's agenda, we're going to talk just really quickly about why this matters, like why we're here today. And then the 3 key topics, which hopefully you remember very well because you've seen them over and over again as you registered, and the things that hopefully jumped out at how you want to join today: active listening, deep questioning, and effective feedback. So those are going to be the main focus areas for us. We'll have a quick little note on putting it all together, but to be honest, you'll see a lot of those synergies and key takeaways as we go through. One will very consistently flow into the next. In addition to, I will be periodically asking questions that you don't necessarily need to answer collaboratively right here, right now, but write them down. Be thinking about, as I'm asking these questions, what are you going to do with the information I'm providing? What are your key takeaways? Some of that stuff. So kind of be doing that for yourself as we go along. I'll talk a little bit about how additionally I can help you at the end, because as you can imagine, in the 40-45 minutes that we talk today, we can only really just skirt over a little bit of this information, and we can really spend a lot of time going a lot deeper. I'm hoping the tools and resources that we provide will help to continue that conversation for you, but there's more opportunity as well. And then, as Randall mentioned, we will leave time for Q&A. If you have a question that's pertinent to something we're on specifically when we're on a slide, don't hesitate to type that in there. She will stop me and let me know what that question is, and we can get that addressed when it makes sense in the content. But you're welcome to just save them up and put them all towards the end as well. Okay, let's see, cursor's not working, but mouse is. Here we go. Okay, so why coaching skills? I put a couple bullets on here, and I think you guys really all know this, but from a leadership standpoint, we really want to utilize the skill of coaching to show up so that we can build stronger teams, so we can create trust, so that we can motivate our people and empower our people. All of those things that are going to be really great for building teams, building great relationships, and everyone being the most effective that they can be in optimizing the company, your team, etc. Now, there's so much more to this. This is just my quick, why coaching skills matter. But I just want to highlight that in today's world that we're in right now, we're in this virtual world, in this COVID-19 world, things are just a little bit different. This is all the more reason to be leaning heavily on this slightly different process than maybe you're used to, this concept of coaching skills, the active listening, the deep questions, and the effective feedback. And if I were to guess, most of you who are here, if you're in a leadership role, even if you're just training to be one, it doesn't matter. You probably do all these things, right? It's probably pretty rare that someone would say, nope, I don't actively listen. You're probably doing them, but what we want to do is to go to a deeper level and put some thought and intention around how you can do it better. Again, this is about leveraging and really elevating your strengths to the next level, okay? So I want you to be thinking about that from this context. In this virtual world, how can I do more of this? How can I do better of this? And how can I show up with these coaching skills for my people and for myself a little bit better, okay? All right, so we are going to dive right into the first component, which is the active listening. So I'm going to read you this little statement here. The ability to focus completely on what an individual is saying and not saying, to understand the meaning of what is said in the context of that individual's challenges and desires, and to support individual self-expression. Now, I put some little levels down here just to kind of get you thinking, but the key component is really, there's the idea of listening to speak, the idea of listening to hear, and the idea of listening to understand. And I actually think those are the best ways to think about these levels right there: speak, hear, understand. Listen. We all know what that means, to listen. It means you just actually, I'm out there, the people are talking, there's noise, there's stuff that's going on. Here, I heard what you said. Maybe there's some thought around it. I'm actually paying attention. And a lot of people live at that hearing space, especially as a manager. If you are truly going into a staff meeting or one-on-one, you're focused, you're in that hear space. You're hearing what's going on. But the listening to understand is truly taking it to the next level. There's a lot of empathy behind it. Maybe there's even some of this concept of deep questioning to ask more information. And we'll, again, segue into that. But what I want to talk about with active listening that goes beyond this, and click into the next slide, are really some things that could be helpful for you when you start to think about, how can I be a better active listener? So there's two pieces. We're going to talk about barriers first, and then we're going to talk about kind of like essentially the opposite of barriers, what will make you a good listener. Oh, look at that, I see a typo right there. Randallyn, what did I do? So barriers for active listening. So these might feel obvious to you, but I would encourage you to think about what barriers you have right now. So if it's your office, your home office, wherever you are, that maybe you didn't have in your work setting before. Is there something different? It could be a child playing outside. I don't even think I have that one, but that's what's going on for me out there. Matter of fact, someone's mowing the grass at the neighbor's house right now. So I have a lawnmower out here. You may not hear it, but I can hear it. And it is a little bit distracting for me. So mental distractions, am I in my best state of mind? Rapid thought, that's a really critical one for both coaches and managers. Someone's firing these ideas at you and you're doing your best to capture them, and you wish you could stop and say, let's talk about number one and number two and number three. But it makes the most sense to really let them get it all out, and you're just kind of quickly writing it down. But there's a lot going on right there. Physical environment, just mentioned that. There could be noise. I have my diffuser going here. If it was noisy, that could be a physical distraction. It's not. But content or message overload, like just how much stuff is coming at us all the time. Emotional response, and just your emotional state really overall. Our physical state, we talked about that. Assumption building. This ties really closely into that kind of rapid thought, but we start thinking about, especially as we're talking to someone, they're sharing information, oh, they're feeling this, oh, they're feeling that. We're making a lot of assumptions around what other people are thinking and feeling without maybe even knowing for sure what's really going on there. Response building, and then selective listening. All of these being really key. So selective listening one, although I have it at the bottom, it's probably the one that needs to be up at the top, because I feel like that's something that happens to a lot of us. We hear the pieces that we want to hear. I need help with this, and then we hone in on that one thing. But in reality, they might have said a lot of other really important stuff that was in there. So try not to do as much of that selective listening. So these are some of those barriers. So again, just think about what barriers you might be having at any time, and then how can you mitigate that? How can you eliminate some of these barriers? What can you do to sort of improve that situation for yourself? So this is a good segue into what I think is a little bit more fun. It's just thinking about the tricks for active listening. So some of these are going to be truly opposites, which makes sense of what we just talked about for distractions. And then some are just different ways of thinking about it. So obviously tune out all distractions. We just talked about what those distractions could be. One of the key things I like to tell people about active listening is taking notes. This is a little bit of a personal preference. Some people are really good if they just stare into someone's eyes. It sinks in very well. It sinks in better for them, something about that visual aspect. And then others, if they do that, they're the ones that are going to want to interject and say, oh, and they're thinking about it, and they want to reply to every little comment someone makes instead of just letting them essentially get it all out. So the taking notes can be a really good strategy for that. Writing down the things you're hearing, maybe even writing down some of those observations, writing down some of the things that perhaps you would want to say or ask. I often have folks who will tell me, I jump in and I ask questions and I don't let them get to it. I'm trying to solve the problem too quickly. Well, just start writing down like, this could be a solution, or this could be a good question. You're just writing down anything that's in your head. That way, when they are done speaking, the they being, frankly, it could be a partner, it could be a friend, it could be a family member, coworker, employee, it doesn't matter. You have the chance to kind of go back, and then you can really do some deeper thought. And this is where you can get into the chance to do some of that summarizing or paraphrasing. But you've got these notes you can circle back to. And what I find, when I often do that, is that I'll even go, that's OBE. I don't need to ask it anymore. It's been overcome by something else that they've said, right? So don't need to ask that anymore. Or, I was going to ask this question, but they already answered it. Great. So if I just let them talk, they come to some of those answers, solutions, sharing on their own, okay? Summarize and paraphrase. This is a really key one that we actually dive into and talk about a lot in active listening. This is, I think I mentioned this before, but we have, and I'll get into this in the end, but we have our Elevate Leaders coaching program, and these three components, the active listening, the deep questioning, and the feedback, are really the kind of the three that are the stars, meaning people really get the most value out of them. They love talking about them the most, and they love really diving in. And because of that, the modules are really intensive and helpful and supportive around that. So summarizing and paraphrasing is one of those things that we speak to a lot in there, and getting people to really think intentionally about what that might look like. So I've tuned out the distractions. I'm taking notes. So Randolyn, what I heard you say was, or maybe it's not even as direct as that. So it sounds like you're feeling like this based off what you said, right? There's a little bit of a feeling in there, but that's okay. Like sometimes you need to put a little bit of that just overall summary or paraphrasing in so that you can understand. Because at the end of the day, next bullet, you're going to check for understanding. So I heard you say you're struggling to get this project done because you can't get a hold of Bob and the system hasn't been working for you. Did I get that right? Did I capture that correctly? Yes, great. Now you can help them solve this problem. And this is where you can really step in and do some of your great work, because you actually heard what was going on there, okay? If you're unsure, ask a question. We talk about this a lot in that deep questioning area as well, but if you need clarification, just ask. And you're going to get some tools and resources on good questions, and we'll talk about it a little bit here, but one of my favorite, which is on the upcoming slide, is not even a question. It's just, tell me more, right? So just tell me a little bit more about that. Like if you need a little bit more information, it's okay to ask for more of that information. Doing your best to empathize. This goes back to those kind of levels and that tier that I talked about at the beginning. Especially right now, it's just such a tough time. Like we're all in it, we're all living it, we're all have some version of our crazy world right now. So just take that moment to empathize. I hear what you're saying. I totally understand where you're coming from. That sounds really tough. Do you want to tell me more about it? Would you like to share some more information? Would it make you feel good to get a little bit more of that off your chest? Whatever. You're just sort of empathizing right there with their situation, because not only can you understand and relate, but it's going to make them feel better to talk about it. Remove the ego. This is a fun one that I always like. This really goes back to the just straight up listening versus letting yourself be the one to talk. And it doesn't matter if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a highly motivated person, if you're an extrovert, if you're a type A, like fill in the blank on how you want to categorize yourself. So at the end of the day, a lot of us out there really do like to help. We like to hear ourselves talk. We like to support. We know we have the answer. We want to share it, right? So that's just where I say remove the ego. It's not about you right now. It's about them. So even if you believe that you have the perfect answer, they need to share all this information. They need to get it out, and then you can circle back later with the right questions or support to help them if they need it. Because realistically, especially right now, there's going to be people who will say, I just need to be heard right now. I don't need advice. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just need to be heard. And if you miss that cue at the very beginning, then you're going to be trying to answer and solve problems when they don't need you to be doing that. So just kind of something to keep in mind there. Body language. This is another really critical one for the active listening component. Are they slouching while they're talking? Are they going like this? And then are you doing those things too? It really goes both directions. So how's body language being received both ways, and what cues can you look for? Someone might be talking and you may be listening, but they may be giving off some cues that have you going, they're not sharing everything they want to be sharing. I need to find a good way to ask a question to get more out of them. So it kind of goes both directions. And then use silence. This is one of those really fun tactics that us coaches really like to use. I know Sherry, who's on the phone right now, always talks about how she might ask her clients a really powerful question, and then she'll just sit there and just let them stew and think, and she just sort of stares at them with her beautiful red curly hair and forces them to kind of just think, right? It's a little awkward. Can you imagine if someone asked you a question and you just sat there silently, or maybe they didn't even ask you questions. They just listen to you talk and then they just sit there silently. There's no question. They're just waiting in case you have more to say. It can feel a little bit weird or awkward for the person on the other end, but it just demonstrates again that you truly are listening, you are there, you are present. If they have more they want to add, that's when they're going to do it. They're going to pause, they're going to reflect, and then they're going to add that extra information. Okay, so couple key things there. Again, just the tricks for active listening. Summarizing and paraphrasing can be really key. Use this concept of taking notes, check in for understanding, and try to empathize as much as you can. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Randallyn, any questions at all?
Not yet. I think all of the people are practicing active listening.
Wonderful.
Everything you have to say.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so for this next part, we're going to move into now deep questioning. And like I mentioned, you'll see this sort of segue where they will bleed together a little bit. And that makes sense, right? We're listening and then we're turning around and asking questions. So when I talk about questions, you're going to hear me say deep questions. You're going to hear me say genuinely curious questions. You're going to hear me say open-ended questions, right? There's all these great creative questions. There's all these ways to say that statement. But at the end of the day, it's really about asking those deeper questions. So the question is, why ask a deep question? So we're going to get a little bit into that when we actually get into some of the questions themselves, and it will start to kind of help and make sense. But it's really the ability to ask these open-ended, deep questions will be what has you showing up as a coach, which goes right back to the beginning of building the trust, engaging the team, allowing them to feel empowered, boosting morale, all of those really good things. Although we're going to talk about specifics in a second, I'm just going to give you an example, right here. We're in a one-on-one meeting and you're reporting out some information, and I just say things like, did you get that task done? Yes or no. Why did you choose to do that? Those are not deep questions. Those are actually kind of horrible questions. It's definitely a managerial hat. There might be a time where you need those questions, but from a coaching perspective, if you're trying to open these people up, that's not going to be the way to do it, okay? So perfect segue, when to coach versus when to manage. We did talk about this a little bit on the last webinar as well, and we have some tools and resources that we can share for anyone who wants more information on this if you're feeling a little bit confused. The Elevate program has a whole module that goes into detail on this, and it's a really great way to take a step back and really think about what is the difference between being a trainer, being a consultant, being a coach, being a mentor, being a manager, being a therapist, right? All of those different hats, because they really truly are different. But at just that top level, when to coach versus when to manage. Really what you need to think about at the end of the day is this a task? Is there a task, a project, something where there is a due date? It's due tomorrow by 3 p.m. It's got to be done. The only way to get this done is for me to give direction. Then that's fine. That's when you put your manager hat on. You provide the adequate direction to get them where they need to go. Doesn't mean you can't ask some really good questions and use coaching within that process, but at the end of the day, this has got to be done tomorrow by 3 p.m. We need to manage. Now, the time to coach might be show up and maybe the project is longer term, or we're brainstorming on how we're going to get there, or we have a problem that we don't necessarily know the solution for, or it's personal development conversation for me, and I'm trying to develop and grow and I want to become the manager. So those could be some of the times to show up as a coach and ask some of those kind of great questions. Okay.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
We had a question about the active listening piece. When you are summarizing and paraphrasing, what are your thoughts on I language versus you language?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I do think it can go either direction, and this is where I always tell people, like, you're going to hate my answer. because I think it depends on the individual. So my hope would be that you have a good relationship with that person on the other side, that you have a good feel for how they're going to receive it. That will dictate whether you do the I or the you for sure. Kind of the same approach with feedback a little bit, right? So same thing, it'll dictate that approach a little bit. Not only that, there are going to be some people who are very receptive to you saying, Randall, so what I heard you say was da 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 da. And some people honestly hate that. They're like, why are you like repeating this back to me like I'm a child and you're my parent? So I think you have to really have a clear understanding of how the individual receives the information. If you're not sure, just soften it the most possible way. So that could be something along the lines of, we just talked about the project that's due tomorrow. It sounded like you had some clarity around it being due on this day. I believe I heard you say that you needed help with Sally. You know, that's a little softer. There's a little I, there's a little you. It's got a little bit of a mixture in there. That could be a better approach. So it just depends very significantly on the individual that you're talking to, okay? So hopefully that answers it. Good question. Anything else, Randall?
That was it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so some of this other stuff I've talked about already just by way of us talking about great questions, but no different than when you're in that active listening mode. You're taking notes, you're thinking about what you want to say. Do the same thing for the coaching, for the deep questions. While they're talking to you, or perhaps they give you a little nugget of information, maybe you just write down some possible questions. Also, if you know you have a great staff meeting coming up, a one-on-one meeting, a new project, something, prep in advance. Just prep for the conversation. Sit down and write out, here's what I think a good question might be based off what I know about the topic. You might not know everything, but I will tell you from years of experience as a coach, it is not always easy to come up with a good question on the spot. It can be really hard. And if you're thinking about all these things that Coach Jen told you not to do, don't ask these types of questions, do ask these, it's overwhelming. There's a lot there. So it takes practice, practice, practice. So practice it, flex the muscle, be okay with the fact that you have to prep a little bit, be okay with the fact that you might not ask the perfect question all the time. One thing I'm going to tell you is one question never to ask is a why question, and I'll explain that a little bit. I have clients that come to me in a panic. Oh, I accidentally asked why. I can't believe I did that. I'm like, don't beat yourself up. You know, just correct it for next time. Be thinking about, instead of asking, why did you do that? How will you change that? How will you shift that question into a non-why question? What can you tell me about the decision that you made, or, you know, something along those lines? So it just takes practice to kind of flex that muscle, okay? All right, so a little bit more on deep questions. So what we're going to talk about here are, I alluded to this earlier, types of questions to avoid and then types of questions to ask. I'm happy to report that Randall will be giving you 2 different documents as a follow-up to this that will be helpful. So one will be a little bit of a summary around the deep questions, kind of what they are, and then one will be some specifics of actual examples that follow what we use, which is the ADIT model, and you'll see all that when you get it. So good resources coming to you that will be a little bit helpful to help prompt some of this and get you started, but just wanted to share a little bit here. So avoid questions that are closed-ended. So there is only a yes or no answer to that. Closed-ended meaning it's not going to allow us to have additional dialogue, okay? Avoid questions that are leading, basically where you're telling them the path that you want them to go down. Now, I will say there is a time and a place for those types of questions, especially if you have people who are really, really stuck, and you can utilize them in your manager hat process to help drive them where that they need to go, okay? And then why questions. Why questions just have that slightly negative connotation. Why did you choose that? Why did you do that? You know, it has that negative feel, so we try to just shift it slightly and change it a little bit, okay? So here are some examples. Are you clear on your objectives? Well, all they can say is yes or no, so it's not really a big choice there. And to be honest, what I like to point out about questions like this are they're also very negative. Are you clear on your objectives? Think about the employee's potential response. The response is yes, or the response is no. If they say no, they might feel bad. They might feel guilty, like I'm a failure, I'm not understanding what my manager is talking about, right? So it's kind of setting them up for that negative feeling. Or on the reverse, because they're worried about saying no, they may say yes, and they may not actually be clear on those objectives, which is almost worse, because then you get to a point where 2 or 3 weeks down the road, you as a manager are assuming that they're doing all the things they need to be doing, and they didn't have a clue what they were really supposed to be doing. They didn't ask clarification, nothing, okay? So anytime we can avoid those, it's just going to be better for everyone across the board. This goes beyond the empowering them, but it goes back to you as a manager or a leader being able to hold people accountable to the actions that they need to take. So shift that question a little bit, okay? Can you do something about this? Again, yes, no. Why did you do that? Just that negative connotation. Do you need help? I always tell my folks to avoid that if you can. Find a better way to ask that question. Of course you want to ask, do you need help? But how can you ask it in a more creative way? Is there anything I can do for you to help to remove any of the roadblocks or barriers? It doesn't have to be that long and fancy, but you get my point. Do you need help? It just sort of assumes you are helpless. Like as the employee, if they're feeling stuck, they may not like that question. It may be a little bit hurtful for them. Now, this could be a time where you could gauge if you know that it's someone who really likes to be asked that question, then utilize it, right? You know your people because you've spent time with them. You've asked them questions. You have really good, effective one-on-ones and all those other great leadership tactics. So you can ask the ones that make the most sense. But in general, like a why question, I try to avoid help being in there. All right, you're going to do that, right? You get sort of starting to lead them, and then also if they don't get it or they don't want to, you really haven't given them a choice. It's, I've got a little block in front of my screen here. It's important we work on personal development. Would you like to discuss your goals? So in this, they're completely leaning down a path. You're saying personal development is important, and I'm telling you it's important. Therefore, do you want to work on your personal development? I mean, what are they going to do? Say no? They can't really at this point because you just made it really clear how important it is. So again, think about how you could reword or shift those questions.
Hey, Jen, we had a quick question.
Yeah.
What is a better way to ask, are you clear on your objectives?
So that's a good question. I would say it's probably multiple questions for one, and it's going to depend on every situation, right? So it might start with, it could even be a little bit of the summarizing and paraphrasing, right? It could be, why don't you repeat back and tell me what it is that we're going to be focused on? Do you understand that objective one focuses more on this than versus that? Is that clear to you? You know, something along those lines. You could break it up into components. It's no different than when I tell folks when you personally are going to ask a question, or when you personally are going to ask for feedback or whatever, get as specific as you can. So from a manager standpoint, if you know, what I really want to know by asking if they're clear on their objectives is I want to make sure that they understand that this is due in 2 weeks, for example, okay? Then make the question about that thing. So whatever it is that you want to get the answer for, flip that and turn it into a question. So are you clear on your objectives? Could be something that's a little bit deeper, like, can you give me some specific examples of how the objectives impact the overall? I mean, again, I'm making these up. It just depends on the situation, but you want to just flip them. This is another situation, though, where I would say, again, it depends on what hat you're wearing, because if you're in that mode, remember, if you're in manager hat mode and the project is due at 3 p.m. tomorrow, you have to ask them, are you clear on your objectives? You can ask them more questions that follow it, or you can tailor it or tweak it. There are 3 specific things that are due tomorrow at 3 p.m., A, B, and C. Is that clear to you, or do we need to go back and cover any of those individually and get more details and information? Do you get this one? Do you get this one? Do you get this one? You know, something along those lines where you're kind of breaking it down and parsing it out. As specific as possible, tweaking the question to get the answer that you need, and then being really aware and intentional if you're wearing your manager hat or if you're wearing your coaching hat. Because you don't have to come up with a really creative, open-ended question if it's a manager situation where it's due tomorrow and you have to do it. Hopefully that gives some perspective there. Okay, good. Randall-Lynn, anything else?
Nothing at the moment. I will keep you updated.
Okay, so this is a good kind of flip. We already touched on it when we were talking about what to avoid, but this is then ask. So ask those open-ended, like I said, thought-provoking, creative, genuinely curious, deep questions. Here's some examples right here. I just put a few in. So what is the most important thing to discuss first? So this it's not just a yes or no, but it really drives into, oh, I'd like to talk about this and this and this and this. So again, it's providing more, which you can be writing down, and then you can be thinking about what the next question you're going to probe or go with from there is. Suppose you can create the perfect solution. What would it look like? So this is a good example of employee comes to you with a problem, and they just want you to answer it or tell them what to do. What we always say is don't just give the answer, help them to come up with a solution. So if you're stuck on what's a good way to ask a question, to get them thinking about solutions when they just don't have a clue, this is a good way to start right here. Suppose you could create the perfect solution. What would it look like? You know, and then that can allow for some brainstorming and some discussion and collaboration. What was a successful project that you worked on? And even within that, it could be, what's a great manager you've reported to? What's the favorite team that you worked on in the past? What job got you the most excited, right? Anything where you're kind of driving to what's worked really well in the past for fill in the blank, whatever the subject matter is, so that it really gets them thinking about what has worked before and how they can apply it to what they've got going on now in their situation today. What would you like to focus on today? You know, great conversation for one-on-one. If you're not using like the effective one-on-one template and you just come in blind, it shouldn't be you as a manager driving and dictating the direction. It should be the employee driving and dictating the direction. So if you're stuck and you don't know what to say, start it off with, what would you like to focus on today? How did you arrive at that solution? That's another really good one too, because maybe they've come to you with a solution and you just want more information. Like, how did they get to that solution? Let's really hash it out and see if it's the best one for this problem. And then I mentioned this before, but my personal favorite, and I think every coach anywhere would ever say this, non-question question, is tell me more. It just gives more information. So I've got a problem and I don't know what to do. Well, tell me a little bit more about that. What's going on? You know, you can use it in so many situations and tweak it and tailor it for so many different types of situations. Okay, I'm gonna head on to the next one because Randall hasn't stopped me. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about effective feedback. This is just a screenshot, but I love our effective feedback framework tool, so I put it in here. So this is a portion of what you will see when you get the effective feedback framework or guide or PDF or model from us. I want you to take a look at this and think about how you are or are not in your current state providing feedback effectively. I think you all know what feedback means. I once worked with a gentleman years ago who called it feed forward instead of feedback because he really wanted to be very focused on how we are making shifts and changes and development and growth forward. So you could think about it as feed forward if you would prefer. But one thing I want to point out that I think is very often overlooked is when we talk about feedback, we are not just talking about opportunities for improvement, errors, mistakes. We are also talking about the positive. And in some cases, the positive can be extremely, if not more powerful, because it allows you to build all this great trust so that when you do have to give the negative or the improvement feedback, it is so much better received. It is so much better received because you have a relationship where it's a safe space to give that feedback, okay? So this framework is primarily addressing what would be more like the negative, or we need to shift a behavior or something along those lines. But I just want to be very clear that the positive feedback can be just as powerful, sometimes if not more powerful from that standpoint of trust building to get where you need to go. And we're going to talk about examples of good and bad ways to give positive and constructive feedback, okay? But so here's the template. You kind of see it all here. You've probably all read it as you're just listening to me talk here. What I really want to highlight is it's really specific. So in this provide context portion, it is what occurred and when. You are not putting in generalizations. It's during this meeting when you made this statement at this time, something to that effect, right? It's very specific. That is something that often gets overlooked in the feedback, is that specific portion. So when you get this, you kind of highlight that and just remember specific. Describe the behavior. This is super key as well, because what we often do is we say, we try to empathize, like, oh, I get it, you're frustrated, you don't like working with Bob, I know it's challenging when Sally levies these, restrictions on us. Don't make assumptions about their situation and why they said something inappropriate or why they sent that email or whatever it is that they did, because in reality, you don't actually know what was going on. They could literally just had a bad day on the way to work. I mean, it could be as simple as that. So don't make assumptions as to why it occurred or, put your own conclusions within there. And there's two reasons for that. One, like I said, you don't know, but two, it's kind of irrelevant. In the grand scheme of things, the reason why they did it is a little bit irrelevant. If they want to share the reason why after you get through this process, so that together you can work through creating a solution that's a little bit more effective, great. Because maybe there truly is an obstacle or roadblock. Like, I can't do this because this thing is in the way. Great, you can work on that together. but you don't need to make that assumption. You need to allow them to say, this is what I need from you in order to move past that point, for example. Okay, so again, just really specific, explain the impact. How did it impact the company, you personally, them, the team, you know, whatever it is. What is that really specific impact that it had? And then provide suggestions on how it could be handled differently. So in the grand scheme of things, if you take a step back, you probably go, yeah, I do all of that. But if you really try and think of an example of the last time that someone maybe did something that they shouldn't have done. I mean, it could even be just your spouse at home. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it could be any sort of situation where you're just trying to remember when you had a little bit of a tiff and you needed to tell someone, please don't do that. How could you have maybe approached it differently? Or what would it look like if you put it in this context? And would it get you the solution that you need or what you would need from that? Okay. All right. So now I'm going to move off into some examples. So I'm going to do 2 examples for you. I'm going to do positive and I'm going to do an improvement one, negative, if you will. Okay, so positive, this is the one I just like to give an example because I think that a lot of people can relate to this. And I want you to think about this in 2 ways. 1, as the manager or the leader providing the feedback, and 2, as the person receiving the feedback. I don't know about you, but one of my most frustrating things in my career was when I would sit down in a development review and they go, you're doing a great job, keep up the good work. Well, no duh. I know I'm doing a great job, and what am I supposed to do with that? That does nothing for me. You know, I want something, either something that I can focus on or something specific so that I know what stuff I'm doing on that's a great job. I mean, I'm working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Is it the emails that are good? Is it the way I collaborate in meetings? Like, what piece of it is good, right? So be as specific as you can with the positive feedback. So a bad one might be, you know, employee manager walk out of a meeting, manager looks at employee, great job in that meeting, you did a great job. You know, that's going to lift them up for a moment. They're going to feel good, but that's about it. It's going to go away. But when you come out of that meeting, if your manager were to look at you, or if you were to look at your employee and say, you really did a great job in that meeting. Your presentation skills were stellar. I wrote down that you said 0 times. That is an awesome improvement from the last meeting where you said 10 times. And I want to highlight too how everyone really reacted to slide 10. There was something about what you were doing there. Everyone loved it. You might want to use that as a model or template in the future because it got some really great reception from the room. Wow, how much better is that? Now you know not only did you do a good job, you didn't say you've got some slides that you can use as a template for the future. Your public speaking skills are good, you know, something that's just much more powerful because it's much more specific. So put yourself in the context of somebody giving you that feedback and then you also giving that feedback to someone else. And I think you just can just take a step back and go, wow, yeah, that makes a huge difference, right? So be specific and as detailed as possible in providing that positive feedback. That improvement feedback, I'm going to flip back so that we can look at our little framework here. What I want to avoid are things like I said, assuming the situation, right? Okay, Sally, you sent that email out earlier today. Thanks for sending the email out, but I did notice that it had some really strange wording and a lot of typos in there. There was a lot of typos in there. I'm not really sure what's going on. Maybe your computer is not working right. Maybe you don't have your email set up to auto correct. Maybe we need to think about that. And I know that Bob was just yipping at you all day, you know, next to you in the cubicle, and that was probably really frustrating for you, Chief. Like, I get it, but we really need to be careful about autocorrect and, you know, and just making sure we get these emails right. Fix that for next time, would you? You know, okay. Not really great feedback. She's probably feeling a little lousy, made a bunch of assumptions, doesn't really do her a whole lot of good. So instead, it could be something along the lines of, I saw that the email went out earlier today at 2 o'clock for the blah, blah, blah pitch. I noticed there were a couple typos in there. We do have a little bit of an impact when we have typos in there for the client because they're really expecting us to demonstrate the best possible skills because they know we're out there representing them as a brand. I just want to make a couple suggestions to just make sure that you edit that before you send it out next time. And if you would like, I'd be happy to review it for you. Okay, so it's not necessarily that she's going to walk out of that meeting going, yay, you know, I did this horrible thing and I got great feedback. But you can see just from the flow and that really bizarrely weird, simple example, it's much better than the first, right? It's a better way of approaching it. And if you've built that relationship and you have that trust, it's much more likely that, Sally is going to say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, no, I understand. That's not a bad idea. Would you mind if I sent it to you next time to review? Yeah, sure, no problem. We'll just get on a good cycle of that or something, right? And again, you're tailoring it to that individual. You know them and how they receive. My weird example may not be an exact one you would utilize, but I just want to kind of show the vast difference between the two.
Hey, Jen, quick question.
Yes.
When it comes to giving that improvement feedback, specifically with like behavior shifting feedback, how quickly should you do it after the incident has happened?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'm kicking myself now that I didn't put that on here. I bet Sherry or somebody asked that too, huh? No, you should really be giving all feedback pretty much right away, immediately when it occurs. And there's a number of reasons for that, but the biggest one just being, we forget, like we're human. So if I make a mistake and 2 weeks later in my one-on-one, I sit down with my manager and they're like, oh, remember when you sent that email, Sally? What email are they talking about? Do I need to go back and pull it up and look at it again? Or remember that meeting where you kind of looked a little snarky and, whatever it is? I have no idea what meeting they're talking about, right? It's just out of sight, out of mind. I know I can't remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday, let alone something I did 2 weeks ago. And positive is really the same way as well. It's the same concept. You want to be able to give it to them immediately. That's why I give the example. The second you get out of the meeting, manager provides good, healthy feedback. If they wait to the one-on-one, it's like, okay, thanks. I appreciate that you're telling me I'm doing good. But it just doesn't have that lasting impact. I'm not walking out with the high of just having done really well and really great in there. So immediately is the ideal scenario or situation. I do have people tell me all the time that's just not possible. Then just make it as quickly as you can. But I would say that and stress, don't wait for the next one-on-one. Don't wait for the next staff. Do your best to set up an ad hoc meeting if you have to. And even if that means you have to tell them, I want to talk about something that occurred, that's okay. Like if you need to do that, that's fine. But don't just wait 2 weeks to provide the feedback. It's a great question.
I have a couple others here, Jen. I don't know. I think we have maybe 2 or 3 more slides and then we're moving into Q&A.
Yeah, but I think we're pretty close. And I think for the most part, we'll hit on, I think we've talked about a lot of it, so it shouldn't be okay. Go ahead and ask the question.
Okay. Becca wants to know what an example would be of how you could reiterate someone's identity.
Yeah, so I think that really does depend on every individual, and this is a little bit where it has you knowing and understanding them a lot. But so again, so it says, show that you have taken the time to consider their situation and you're not attacking their character. So that's really the key here, is that you're not attacking their character. So a good example would be if it wasn't a meeting where there was like an outburst for, it may not work as much for an email typo per se. Well, no, actually, now that I say that, it probably would. But anyway, so like there's an outburst or something along those lines. It's not like you have a temper tantrum, you don't approach things well, you're just not coming in sort of attacking the approach and their attitude, their style, and who they are. So the opposite of that would be some possible solutions could be even doing, I'm sure you've all heard of like sandwiching feedback, right? So you could potentially start by sandwiching the feedback a little bit. You've been doing really well in meetings, things have been going really great, and then you can kind of start to provide that context of other things. So you can utilize it by the sandwich method of using good feedback. For me, it's more about just making sure that you aren't doing the attacking rather than thinking about that you are reiterating the identity. Because that's a key point, but it may not always make sense to do so in the conversation, but you may want to start off with something that's positive and just sort of a little bit of that reassurance. You don't have to do that. It's just a potential method. Some people don't like the sandwich method, positive, negative, positive. But I do think that starting off with something that's a little bit more positive that really speaks to what they are doing well, who they are, how they're performing, and really the contribution that they're making overall is really key. So it could even just be, you're a huge contributor to this team. It's really important that we have you here, and the role that you play is critical, something along those lines. So that's not necessarily a positive, but it's just, you are important, here's why you're here, and then you can kind of go into the flow. But that kind of gives you a couple different options. Yeah.
Awesome. Jen, I have 2 other quick questions. When you talk about this improvement feedback and kind of making it a priority to give as it happens, what do you do when you know that some people need to be given more space before they're given critical feedback?
Give them more space. absolutely. I mean, goes back to the, you know, your people, right? Some people just absolutely do need to process and digest some things. There might be an opportunity for you, whether it's a quick desk walk by, pop in, Slack, email, Zoom call, whatever, to say, you know, I do want to talk about the meeting last week. I have some good thoughts on how we can improve things going forward. Why don't you take some time to think about it yourself, and then we'll circle back together, right? I mean, obviously it depends on the situation, but it's okay to give those people a little bit of a heads up that it will occur and it is important, but that you're giving them the space. I often find that people who fall into that camp are also the people who need a lot of prep. So for example, you're rolling out a big change to the company or something. These are the people that you almost have to like secretly go tell them in advance, we have a meeting in 2 days where we're rolling out a big change. I need to tell you about the big change because it takes you so long to process this stuff, and I know you get really flustered if you find out last minute or, you know, whatever. Those are often the same type of people. So you just have to know how to work with them and what makes the most sense for them. But yeah, it's okay to give them space.
Last one is, how do you feel about asking permission to give critical feedback before embarking on it?
Before embarking on it? Yeah, I think that's okay. You can ask, but here's the problem with doing that. If they say no, and it is feedback that needs to be given, you put yourself into a hole. You don't have the opportunity. So it could be how you ask it, right? So it's not a closed-ended question, it's an open-ended question. It could even be, it's kind of like what I tell people all the time, like find out how your team wants to receive feedback, find out how your team wants to be rewarded and recognized. It's that same idea. So maybe your question is not, are you okay with me giving you critical feedback? Because they might say no. Maybe your question is something like, what in the past when you've been given feedback, what is a way that you felt that it was the most effective for you to utilize and make change going forward? How did you personally like feedback to be delivered to you? Do you prefer it to be in person? Do you prefer it to be over email? You know, something along those lines. So you can ask questions about how they might want to receive the feedback, not necessarily saying that you aren't going to give it, but then at least you're more prepared for how you can give it in a way that's going to be effective for them.
Great. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we highlighted and shifted on most of this, and you guys asked some really great questions that hinted at to a lot of that as well. And I've said a lot of this already, but the power of positive feedback really is that building trust, again, especially positive, trust. Like if you feel like you don't have a lot of trust with your team, be real with them and start building trust by way of providing really good, solid, effective feedback. It's a slow burn because you got to build it up, but there's some opportunity there. So, and everything else that you see here as well. Let's lift everyone together, let everyone grow, and everything that will really just boost morale, empower the team, all that good stuff. Okay, so bonus tips, I've alluded them in every section. I just wanted to reiterate it here because it's important. Practice. Prep, write out questions in advance. Think about what you want to say. How are you going to ask them that way that they like to receive feedback, right? Prep, take that time, mark off 10 or 15 minutes before a meeting and prep so that you're ready to go for your active listening, for your deep questioning, for your feedback. Write it out, whatever method's the best for you, whether it's literally pen and paper or a computer. And then get support. If you're stuck or you're unsure, reach out to someone who can help you, whether it's another teammate, whether it's a coach, like anyone that could help you who's maybe been through that process, because this is not always natural or innate, especially as we're going from that good or okay level to that great level. Okay, putting it all together. So we've talked about using your listening skills, asking deep questions, providing regular effective feedback. Again, thanks for the person who reminded me of that. And showing up as a coach. So checking in, are you elevating your leadership? If not, seek some support, because all three of these components really do round out in that showing up as a coach, which I think all of you could probably even just hear in the context and examples why that's truly important. You're not always going to wear your coach hat. Sometimes you're going to wear your manager hat, and maybe sometimes your consultant or mentoring hat. But for those times that you're using the coach hat to build and lift the team, it's critical. Okay, and let's see. So these are pretty much the same questions I left from the last webinar, but I wanted to just get you thinking again. Some of them you've seen throughout. What's one action that you wrote down for yourself that you're going to take after this? And if you haven't written one down, write it down right now, please, while I'm wrapping up these slides. What specific steps will you take to incorporate some of these coaching skills? Was there maybe a component that jumped out to you where you see an opportunity for you to do it better, even if it's just providing specific positive feedback, whatever it might be? Who will hold you accountable and how? Do you have a buddy? Do you have your manager? Like, what is it you're going to do and who's going to hold you accountable to doing that? And then just a reminder that myself, or frankly, anyone on the Elevate team here can really support you through this process. Now, I'm going to talk really quickly about the tools we're going to provide. We're going to give you 2 different guides for deep questioning, one for active listening, one for effective feedback. So you've got lots of tools and resources coming to you. You can go do the client action e-coaching module, just really kind of kick off the e-coaching process for you. That's complimentary. You can do that. You'll get a link to doing that. It will then connect you to me at the end. Please register for the next webinar, which will also be in the email that will be sent out to you. And then all of you should have received an email from me yesterday. So if you didn't reach out, I got a lot of great questions and comments from people looking forward to today. If you didn't reach out, please don't hesitate to email me there, check in, ask more questions if they didn't get answered here, you weren't comfortable asking them, or if you have just something you want to chat about, whatever it is, I'm available. And then today I want to talk to you about our Elevate Leaders program. I alluded to this a few times throughout, but these 3 key topics we talked about today are 3 of the 13 e-coaching modules. We go into them in much more depth, obviously. The modules themselves can take up to 60 minutes to complete, so it's like having an electronic coaching session, that's what we call e-coaching, in addition to having a 1-hour, 60-minute coaching session with me throughout that process as well. So the program really does work on elevating and really giving you those skills that you need to show up as a coach and elevate yourself to that next level. So if that's something of interest to you, we do have I'm going to click the other button here. We do have a code again, just like we had before. We're going to be doing the Leaders 2020 code again if anyone does want to enroll. We do have opportunities to do Elevate. We just have also leadership coaching, so whatever is best for you, you can reach out and ask me. If you just want to have a consult with someone on La Vida, you can use that link there to do so. That free e-client action, e-coaching action tool kit, toolbox, whatever we're calling it these days, you will also have that in the email where you can do for me as well. So if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, do that. If you haven't connected with me via email, please send a note. As Randolyn mentioned, she put my consult thing in the chat there as well, so you can also schedule time with me there. But I think that's all I have. So I'm going to flip it to the next slide. I think the next one just says questions. So I'm going to leave it on this slide in case you want to pull any of these resources while we're chatting. Randolyn, do you have any additional questions that we did not cover that we want to go through?
No, I don't. I actually was just sent the link for your next webinar, so I'm going to drop it in the chat. If you guys are interested in following up with Jen's next webinar, it's going to be about emotional intelligence. So if you are wondering what that looks like on your team, the link is in the chat. You can feel free to go RSVP for that. Now, if you have any questions in general, we would love to talk to you about them.
Yeah, please don't hesitate to type any in. Just for the next webinar, emotional intelligence, super fun topic that some people are really familiar with, some people are not. We'll talk about just the basic framework of it, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, but we're really going to be honing in as to why that's so important, especially now in this world where we're in, where we're doing a lot of virtual stuff, and it's just hard for all of us on a personal level and to team and collaborate with others. So that's going to be a good conversation. And one thing I find about emotional intelligence is that a lot of folks, they just don't know what it really looks like. Like, yeah, you can say self-awareness, but what does that really mean? So we'll kind of get into some details around how to know or sort of self-gauge on a checklist, for lack of a better word, if you are showing up as an emotionally intelligent person, leader, manager, individual, and what that could look like to shift those behaviors if you're not. So that's going to be a fun one for sure. A good segue from some of these other topics that we've had. And if you did not get a chance to attend the last webinar, like I mentioned, and you would like to watch the recording, I would be happy to share that. You can even just email me and ask for it, and I'll make sure that you get a copy. All right, anything else, Randolyn?
I think I'm going to give people another second here to get any questions that they have into the chat. Mostly people are just praising you for your amazing content and examples and specific pieces of what you presented.
Okay. Was that just a thank you, or was I missed the first part? It blurred on my end. That's just my bad.
No, just to thank you.
Oh, okay. Good. I just want to make sure I didn't miss something. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Good. Good. No, thank you. I'm glad you guys have enjoyed it, and hopefully there's a lot of good takeaways. It's those topics where, like I said, it's like we all know, yeah, we do it, but how well do we really do it? Matter of fact, we even had just, gosh, I want to say a week or two ago, basically every week our coaches all get together and we just kind of talk about topics, and we do sort of like we call it almost like a leaders teaching leaders framework, and we just constantly do it to keep up on our coaching skills and, you know, and collaborating and getting ideas from others. And we talked about active listening the other day, and it was great question or great dialogue, because as coaches, that's like what you do, right? And you have to be really great at it as a coach. And just to know that all of us have, you know, distractions, again, like the 6-year-old playing outside or the person mowing the grass, like we're all human. So what can we all do, no matter how good we are at the skill itself, to really set ourselves up for success? So
Hey, Jen.
all of us have things to learn. Yeah.
Thoughts on reverse feedback, providing feedback to your leaders. Do you use the same application, or what's your advice on an alternative approach?
No, good question. So I don't necessarily call it reverse feedback, but it's sort of like leading up, using the feedback framework to lead up. That's just kind of more personally my thought. 2 components. So I would say you should, if you have not, you should be having a conversation with your manager, leader, supervisor, fill in the blank, wherever the up is, around feedback in general. And it should be to that concept of, what is the way that you personally best like to receive feedback? Are you comfortable with me providing feedback? What type of feedback would you like to receive? Are there areas that you would prefer not to receive feedback? You know, any of that. You should be having that conversation well in advance so that it's very clear what is that safe space to share. And hopefully that will happen naturally, just by way of you even saying to them, I really want feedback. Like, I want feedback, right? You need to be going to your manager saying, I want feedback because I want to grow, I want positive, you know, I want opportunity for improvement. With that said, how can I provide it to you, right? It should always be a very reciprocated type conversation. So once you've done that, hopefully you have the clarity to be able to then provide it, but you can absolutely still use that framework as part of a way to share that information. You will just need to, from a, I'll say like political type standpoint, just make sure you tailor it so that it feels really good and you don't feel like you're saying something that might, you know, endanger your own career. I mean, just to be blunt, you don't want to say something that's going to hurt your career, right? But the framework model should be very similar. You can use a sandwiching approach. You can use the approach of your leadership style is critical. Everything you do is what I need. I'm learning from you, right? Something that's at that top point that's really reiterating that identity and the role that they provide to you as an individual. And hopefully that will kind of help. But just make sure you have the conversation up front, how they want to receive it, if they want to receive it. Read the body language. If they're like this, then maybe you can't provide them great feedback, but maybe there's another way to do it that you just need to get more creative in. So learning their style and then figuring out how you adapt and what makes the most sense to do. Sadly, there's not always a perfect answer for all of these things. So just why we love coaching, because then you can come in and say, my boss did this, what should I do? And then we can talk about it. And I can say, well, tell me more about the situation. How did you initially react? How did they react? Well, you know, and start diving in so that we can craft something that makes more sense for your situation.
Jen, we had one other question. When you are working with your team around some of the deep questioning, maybe like towing the line between managing and coaching perspective, how do you feel about the question, what can I do to support you more when executing this project?
I love that one. And here's why, because you got specific when executing this project. If you just said, what can I do to support you more? It's a good question, but it's not going to really necessarily get you what you need. So drive in, be deeper, as specific as possible. So about this project, or every staff meeting, you roll something out, a new process. What can I do to support each of you individually to implement this process effectively, right? Something along those lines. And if you're doing it in that repetitive manner too, where you're always kind of asking that same type of question. They'll come to expect it, and they may even answer it before you even ask it, which is always the key.
Awesome. Well, with that note, thank you guys so much for coming today. Like I said, you can expect to receive the slides, the recording, all of this great stuff, Coach Jen's resources to your inbox later today, along with a link to sign up for that next webinar if you didn't snag it from the chat. So we hope you had a wonderful hour spent with us. We were so glad that you're here, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, awesome. Thanks, everyone.